A good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone. If you can just give a quick feedback, you can hear us and hear us well. Yes, feedback is there. Thank you. So the presentation we're going to give you today, you can see in the bottom right corner, that's not a mistake. That's indeed in Munich on 30th of April. We did this presentation once already. There are changes, so if you were there in Munich, we have some slight modifications in the material, some of the journey that we've taken since then. My name is Zsolt Vicián. I'm heading up Group Enterprise Architecture at MOL Group, and
I'm Peter Haworski, and I'm the Enterprise Architect for different areas as well.
And so today we're going to tell you about our journey, which is roughly a 2-year journey now. So let's just begin. I want to start with a quick overview of our company and where this story takes place, and then we're going to dive into, in the end, very practical enterprise architect tricks, and along the way we're going to explain how we've built our enterprise architecture framework. But to start with, so about MOL Group. MOL Group is a fairly large company. I think globally it would be still more in the mid-size. We have 25,000 employees. We are present in 30 countries. We have a market cap, depending on share price and exchange rates, around $6 billion. We have a footprint which is centered around Central Eastern Europe, plus we have an upstream operations in parts of Asia. As you can see, MOL stands for Hungarian Oil. So the headquarters of this company is in Hungary, Budapest, but regionally we have teams in larger teams in Croatia and Slovakia, but then in all of these countries around. So that gives you an understanding in terms of the geographical size of the business. Now, MOL operates a complex and highly integrated value chain, from downstream refining, or actually from upstream to downstream refining, petrochemicals, retail, and recently we initiated our circular economy services business, which is a completely new animal. It's about communal waste management and, of course, all sorts of recycling, including, for example, plastic recycling, but others as well. And when I say we have an integrated value chain, this is just an example, so you get the idea that indeed from the waste we collect, we use, used cooking oil, we feed it back in our refinery, and we do chemical recycling and mechanical recycling. But at other parts of the enterprise as well, we have a highly integrated business. And in terms of our retail network, so we operate around 2,300 retail sites. These are fuel sites or gas stations. And what you can observe here is, maybe for now these icons are small, but in each of these icons, I'm going to highlight it here. MOL is following a brand strategy where we retain national brands. These are the 3 biggest brands that MOL uses, but of course there are other brands as well. And I guess you're asking this question now that enough of this company introduction, why would all this be relevant? And apart from it being relevant that you understand the enterprise context that we are talking about, this is also relevant because of Conway's law. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend Googling this. Melvin Conway worked for IBM, and he published this paper in 1968. essentially what he concludes or says in this article is organizations who design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. And indeed, I Googled it and you can find the original paper. So it's right here. And this statement that organizations produce systems that mirror their communication structures is extremely important, because MOL carries an architectural heritage, but also actually you could say an architectural reality. So the company grew through inorganic growth, such as acquisitions. There is a cost-conscious, fit-for-purpose approach across the organization. There are many silo solutions, but I'm not saying this in a negative sense. The fact is that if you give ownership to a local organization, a local brand to play on their own market, they're going to create solutions that fit their needs, and that results in what you could call silo solutions if you step away several steps and look at it from a distance. And overall, with the history, with the cost consciousness, we have many old-timer and highly customized applications. And this is the environment in which 2 years ago, in September 2023, the Enterprise Architecture team was created. And our mission in very simple terms is this: to simplify MOL Group's application portfolio through group-level governance. So we were created as a small team of 6 enterprise architects whose role is to create the processes, the modeling, the governance structure to ensure that we end up with a simpler application portfolio. I don't think I mentioned that later on the slides. We have roughly 1,500 applications, but the definition of application is a difficult question. So if I want, I can count it as 8,000, and if I want, I can count it as 1,000. So it's a large, whichever number you pick is a large number, it depends on definition. But when the organization was created, I sat down with our CIO and I asked him which way he wants to go. Do we create a big transformational program to simplify our portfolio, or do we go on an incremental, lifecycle-driven approach tied to project execution? And if you listened until now, based on the cost consciousness, fit for purpose, very much practical organization, indeed, the choice was to go with the incremental lifecycle-driven approach. So when a system comes to its end of life, then there is no other option. We need to invest, and that's the point when we need to invest in an intelligent way. And so for this, we have a project approach. We follow a stage gate approach. You can see the 5 stages of our approach. And at stage 3, which is the point where the investment proposal for a project is approved, that's where the Group Enterprise Architect has a prior agreement role in our approval workflow. So essentially, if a project has IT relevance, it will not get funding until I sign the paper. And that is our strong control point to make sure that anything that comes, at least at that point in time, has a proper design and has asked the right questions. So with that, Enterprise Architecture made it into the distribution of authorities or delegation of authorities in the organization, and that red line is our control point. But you can see here that we have other checkpoints here as well in terms of how we organize our architecture work. And in all of this, I mentioned that we have a team of 6 enterprise architects. One of the first things we did when the organization was started was to define the different type of architect roles, and we simplified it into these 3 categories: enterprise architects who provide governance, cross-business functions, and provide the framework as, for example, the entire modeling tool and framework. Domain architects, like for downstream or upstream or retail or circular economy services or HR, whatever, are responsible for the design, the portfolio, the choices in their domains, and they are the ones who need to prepare the project proposals from an architectural perspective. And then solution architects are the guys who participate in the project and do the detailed design and have to deliver the details. And the other bit we did at the outset is we created 2 documents. This is all very small and on one slide, and I won't read it all. I just want to show you the 2 documents. So on the left-hand side, those are the minimum requirements. We'll come back to this later because in Enterprise Architect, we have a checklist that gets on every project design that goes through these. So for example, here we have a checklist item that in case the project is replacing an end-of-life application, then, or is implementing something new in the portfolio, then the project must deliver the relevant blueprint, or you could say reference architecture for that domain. So we have some of these things that as projects come, we standardize, we don't go back, we don't do a big overhaul, big transformational program, but one by one, when things get on the table, we address them properly. And this means that over time, maybe over 10 years, 15 years, we will slowly clean out our portfolio in an organic manner. And on the right-hand side, we created 10 digital architecture principles. These are the principles based on which we evaluate projects, and this is sort of the basis of our decision making. And then let me hand over to Peter for a bit.
So in our case, as you have seen, we are basically project-driven, we are doing a project-driven architecture governance, and we also wanted to find the possible solutions in-house that we already have. So in our case, we already have had knowledge regarding the Enterprise Architect, the modeling tool, and we were also looking for different standards that can help us to achieve the modeling framework and can help us to move forward with the solution. And in our case, we came up with an idea that we wanted to shrink down and keep the supported languages in the minimum level, which is necessary to run the projects. And for that, we basically decided to move forward with the Archimate, UML, and the BPMN standards. And of course, we also was looking for solutions outside from the languages, and we basically started to process and read and try to come up with ideas from the books from Kotushev. And at the end, we were basically come up with an idea that how our teams are connected. So what you can see in the picture, of course, we have information based on a SharePoint side. We have a Microsoft project and the SharePoint side regarding the projects and the status of it. And we also have a deployment database, which is called Shamu. So our goal was to integrate the whole solution together. And of course, it needed a lot of things to do to move forward with this.
And so this is the journey that we went through. So you can see in 2023 September, the organization was created, and there's our vision. So let me just take you through this vision. So the first thing we did right after the architecture team was created, we defined something that we called a solution context diagram. This was, I think, inspired by, but this looks nothing like the C4 context diagram, but that was, I would say, some distant inspiration. The solution context diagram, first of all, when the organization, the architecture team was created, we said that we want to get started with something practical. So this is a diagram that's created at the beginning of a project, and it communicates what the project is going to do. There's a simple color coding: blue for changes, green for new additions, red for deletions or removals, and white are the applications that should participate in testing or somehow in other way they're impacted by the environment. And then we had swim lanes that go from external cloud down to our industrial layer, because from a cybersecurity perspective, this is an important distinction. And what I wanted to say is, now this is an enterprise architect diagram that you can see here. But when we started, this was PowerPoint, and that was deliberate. We first wanted people to start creating these context diagrams. My mantra was, and it still is, that if you understand your project, it takes 20 minutes to create a diagram like this. If you don't understand your project, then don't come for approval. Because because the original pushback we received was, this is additional work, and why are we asking for additional work from an overloaded team? And essentially people realize that indeed, if you understand what you're doing, it's not a big deal to draw it. If you don't understand it, then you need to work on it until you understand your project. So that's the story. But this was the very first artifact that we created, and we mandated a few months after the organization, the Enterprise Architecture organization, was created. Having a context diagram is the absolute minimum requirement of getting an approval for the investment proposal at stage 3, which we talked about earlier. But then we went ahead and contacted Sparx Systems Europe, and we met with Horst and Bob, who helped us a bit on our journey. And so, for example, one of the things they asked for was for us to collect different models that we are using in the organization so they can look at what we have. And it turned out that we have, I mean, this is a list of well over 100 slides of different shapes and forms and different purpose of architecture designs from different projects, and you name it, we have it. You can see in the center some of the different tools where we found designs and process flows and requirements and deployment diagrams, and some things they couldn't even name what they are. They just had boxes and arrows on them, and it was something to do with the project. But so this is where we started. And when we looked at all of this, and we had a couple of days of discussion with Horst and Bob, they recommended that we write down our modeling methodology. We create a document about our methodology, which is an evolving document. And so we first did our initial, let's say, minimum viable product version of the document. It turned out to be something like 90 pages. This is the table of contents. To help the organization follow along and learn what we are talking about, we actually pushed this document to Notebook LM. So that's a Google Gemini tool. If you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. What it did was it created an interactive podcast to explain the methodology at an introductory level to people. And then, of course, they need to read the document, but it helped understand this. And where we are now going to go deeper, and Peter's going to take us through, our Metamodel and some of our modeling frameworks. So I think that's where it becomes a bit more hands-on and interesting for you.
So basically, to support our processes, we needed to create a MDG package. And of course, besides the existing languages, we started to design our own, which means that we needed to define our custom elements. And we also needed to define our custom diagrams like the solution context diagram. So every diagram which helps to move forward the projects and help the projects to understand and build up the necessary information base through diagram creation. And we also used a model building template. And at the end, we were coming up with the so far final Metamodel. So this Metamodel is basically helps to deliver the project effects, and the center of it is basically the project. So every project is connected with applications, as you can see, and the application categories and application instances. In our case, these connections have different meanings. For example, application, we are differentiating applications and application instance, which means that applications are on logical level and application instances are on physical level. Because in our case, we wanted to differentiate the two because applications are strictly connected to the application governance on enterprise level, but on project level, if you are considering and checking the project effects, usually your project are affecting already implemented and installed systems. This is why we are differentiating the instances from the applications. With this, we also have a better understanding regarding the reference architectures and the propositions and the reference architecture. So, which means that if you are using the application connections with the projects and you are designing the applications, at the end, you're going to have the reference architecture for a solution that you can deliver with the instances later. So this is why we designed applications and application categories. So just for example, you have a ERP system, which is, for example, an application category. And based on that application category, you have an application, which is, for example, the SAP, and you have the local or the global SAP instance, which basically serves the functionality for the computer. So these are the three layers and the main pillars, main elements of the Metamodel that helps us to organize the data and organize the connections between the elements. We also started to create our MDG based on the APM module, which means basically you can see that the capability level is basically following the same structure like the Prolaborate APM module does. And with that, we are able to come up with the idea to how to manage the business capabilities and the maturity of it. So these are connected with the applications and the projects, and this is how basically based on the connections we can analyze the data that which projects are affected, which capability or deliver some kind of a capability, and which applications are supporting or providing such business capabilities. So from technical point of view, we also wanted to go to the standardization side, that we wanted to standardize the technologies, the applications, and as you can see, or as I hope you understand that we have applications which are helping us to create the reference architectures. We started to create the technology category, which basically is a collection of the supported technologies inside the company. And we basically differentiated two types of IT components. For example, you have a .NET 3.5 and you have a .NET 9. And in our case, .NET 3.5 is a tolerated technology, and the .NET 9 is basically the preferred technology. So with this model, we were able to model the standardization, the technology standardization, and we were also able to generate documentations from that connections. Regarding the so last time at Munich, this model slightly changed, especially the application instance side, because there was a demand to extend the application instances with interfaces as well and different levels of the abstraction. And we identified basically 3 levels of abstraction in our company. The main problem was that everyone was talking about interfaces, and sometimes they were thinking about physical interfaces like WSDS or HTTP URLs. Sometimes they were thinking on information flows or data flows, which were named like interfaces. And sometimes they were thinking on higher levels in the naming of interface, which was a little bit confusing. And we started to model this, in a more clear way. On integration level, we are defining a generic connection between 2 application instances, which means that it is on higher logical architectural level. Information flow level means that that's the data flow, and we are using information flow connection between the items with the data entity connected to it. And this represents the general data flow between the systems, not exactly the specification request response structures, but the business thinking data flow. I'm sending the information from A to B, from B to A, and these are the general business-like information flows. On interface level, we also started to use request and required and provided interfaces, which is representing the physical implementation of such a solution or such an endpoint in our case. So this is the new part so far.
And so next to our Metamodel, we also started to create some of our catalogs in Sparx. So we have now an application instance, a project, a capability, and an organization catalog that we can reference, or actually we must reference in all of our models. And on top of all of this, so you remember we have many old-timer solutions, and we have a drive to simplify, and that is where the time assessment, which is stands for tolerate, invest, eliminate, and migrate. So this is an assessment methodology based on technology, fitness, and functional fitness, where time assessment comes in and where the capability model comes in, because based on the capabilities, that is the tool. By mapping applications to capabilities, we can identify applications that serve similar purposes. So when one application is being retired, instead of replacing it with another one, we have a tool to identify if we already have something similar in our portfolio and we can use it. Now, in terms of the time assessment, we started out with the Flexra Snow License Manager, because what that gave us was a list of outdated components down to the dynamic link library and registry entries and individual executable levels. And then we used that data and mapped it to the servers on which application instances are running. And if there was a server with multiple old components, then we inferred that the applications running on that server are likely impacted. And by the way, this assumption turned out to be true. So over 80% of the servers that were identified indeed had old applications. So we did this assessment, and anything that's in the eliminate or migrate zone is in our focus, because for that a project will be coming, and that's our moment of opportunity to simplify, standardize, put the architecture right, create standards, etc. And in terms of capability model, we didn't have something to start with, or actually we developed something over the years, but no one was using it in the company. So we made a decision and we simply adopted the capability model that SAP provided us. And the benefit of this is we are embarking on an S4 migration, of course, with many other companies. And using the SAP capability model also creates the opportunity to identify opportunities to consolidate features to S4HANA, for example, in the future. But overall, this was just a good starting point, an industry standard, or at least a widely used capability model that gives us a language to be able to talk to others in a meaningful way. And so overall, this is where we are. Our vision is this: we want to create a single enterprise framework that's the single trusted source for application and infrastructure. So far, we are more focused on the application side, but on our roadmap, infrastructure is there. It's both logical and deployment. Again, so far we started out with the logical level, for example, the solution context diagram, but we are moving to the deployment, for example, with the interfaces that Peter just talked about. The enterprise and solution architecture, I personally believe in modeling in an end-to-end manner. I don't think just doing enterprise architecture at a portfolio management level really drives the level of value. I want to be able to go down to solution level, for example, with blueprints like reference architecture. And we want to model the technology and the process layer. So on our roadmap, we do want to, we are already engaging with our business analysts, and we see an opportunity in harmonizing how BPMN process flows are modeled, and how, for example, a domain model for a project and how our application instances could feature on a BPMN diagram, and how that would bring these things together in a very meaningful way. So that's our vision. I guess we have a few years of work ahead of us. And then now let's switch gears, and quickly we wanted to show you a few use cases of how we got things done in Sparx. So this is now very much hands-on down in the details into how Sparx Enterprise Architect works. And so let's start with the first one about the project-based color coding on the solution context diagram.
So the project-based color coding was the challenge in our case, was that to create a project-level architecture effect diagram which doesn't affect other diagrams if someone is using the same object in the model. To do this, it was not so easy, because if you are using legends, then if you are using the colors, then you might affect others' diagrams who were creating another diagram. If you change some color, maybe that diagram will be changed as well. So we come up with an idea to use, and we decided to use legends. But if you are trying to use it in a clever way, what we wanted to achieve is to have a different coloring on different project diagrams. And how can we achieve this? We wanted to use a standardized legend, and we knew that based on tag values, we can color the elements on the diagrams. So in this case, we decided to move forward with the tag value approach, and what we have done is just add another tag value to the project, to the application, or to the element on the diagram, but with a unique name. So in our case, the project identifier became the name of the tag value, and the effect on the element become the value of the tag. So to do this and make it work, we needed to create a lot of scripts, basically, which was helping us to automate and do this feature. And the surprising thing was that we were very quick, because we were using ChatGPT and Sonnet 3.7, and with that AI's help, we were done in days. So what is happening currently, if you open in our case, if you are opening a solution context diagram and you want to color that specific element with a JavaScript, you can add the identifier of the project, and based on that, we dynamically add the generated legend to the diagram on the fly in Sparx Enterprise Architect. And after that, with the changes with another JavaScript, we can change the values in the tag value, like changing new application. And based on this, if you read the tag values of an element, you can basically build up the history of that specific element, that which projects was introduced it, which project was changing it, and which project was decommissioned that specific application. And to do this and make everything in an organized way, we had to build a catalogs in our repository. So we were thinking a lot about how many repositories we need, and at the end, we decided to go with only one repository with multiple root nodes, because we wanted to have the different information available for each other. And if we are using multiple repositories, it makes a little bit complicated to do that. So we decided to move forward with this. And we have one EA master repo as the single source of truth for the master repositories. And we have different root nodes for the cybersecurity solutions, for the upstream, for the downstream, for the different organizations. And under that, they are managing their own solutions and solution repositories. This is how we call it. And basically, this is the area where they creating the project impact diagrams one by one under that projects. Currently, we are using this whole repository in a quite liberal way, which means that everyone has access to the system, all of our domain and solution architects, but with some kind of restrictions that they are not allowed to delete elements from the master repository catalogs. They're reusing it. They are not duplicating. They are reusing the existing elements during the creation of the project impact, project solution context diagrams. But we are enterprise architects who are allowed to delete some application or element from the catalog if it is needed. So we have this kind of restrictions, and Sparx was able to do that. We also restricted the available modules for the architects, like as I mentioned before, and you have seen on the previous diagrams, we added only the necessary languages that is needed and approved and understandable for the colleagues, and we just shrink down the huge amount of possibilities of EA for the architects, and we allow them just a few modeling languages to them. And so these are the restrictions, and we also had different type of data sources, for example, SharePoint regarding the projects, and we have a deployment database which is called SHAM. So to make the data in sync, we had to develop some kind of plugins in Microsoft.NET to make it work. The screen comes up, choosing the right settings for the synchronization, and that synchronization is done by that specific plugin using the Sparx Enterprise Architect. So this is how we were able to come up and manage the structure and the applications.
And so this is the checklist I mentioned. So when you use the model builder to create your project, it comes with a set of pre-configured files, and then that includes the empty checklist. The checklist is a translation of the earlier checklist that you saw in the beginning, and this in a way helps communicating clear expectations to the architects that these are the things that we are going to validate as we go through that. And in terms of the validation process, this is how we track our architecture. We made a decision and we said that we are doing a current state modeling. We call it the current state modeling principle, which means that everything that is currently planned is modeled as planned in Sparx. Everything that's currently active is marked as active, and everything that's decommissioned is either deleted or marked as retired. But that also means that diagrams change, which is good because it always shows the accurate current stage. But because project approvals depend on the solution context diagram at the beginning of the project, and it's an important document that's a handshake with the project, we need to keep a track of what was approved. And for this, we are using the timelines feature from the design menu. And what we do is very simply, we create an image snapshot. We looked at all sorts of other solutions, but in the end, we decided that this is good enough for us. We create an image snapshot and we add a comment with, in this case, it's a simple comment, but we can also list some of the requirements or agreements that were made during the approval. And this way, at any time, we can go back and see the version of the diagram that was approved at the investment proposal approval time or at any later or earlier time with the comments around it. So for us, this gives, within this current state modeling principle, this gives us still a reference point. And then finally, as we close, and so this is 1 minute to the end now, there are a few things that would be great. So these are some of our wishes and some of our learnings here. So first of all, Enterprise Architect, the name suggests it's ready to handle enterprise requirements. Unfortunately, that's not the case in every situation. So for example, the access management is definitely not enterprise grade. Hiding confidential projects, fine-grained control over modification of attributes. Yes, with Prolaborate, some of it is possible. Third-party contractor access with limited scope. All of these are, I mean, there are all sorts of workarounds and hacks and things, but they are not the simple click and it works type of solutions also. So I think that's definitely an area to improve. The other is there is no time machine in Sparx. Yes, you can export baselines and you can import them and compare them, etc. If I were in my dreams, I would say I want a tool where I can drag a slider and move to a date and see the status. Like in SharePoint, you click on a document and you see the history of the document. Of course, I understand this is the history of an entire model. It's not a simple solution, but that would be great. The third big pain point is how connections are managed. Actually, they're not objects. They're not even in the objects table in Sparx, but also they work differently, and there are some issues like statuses, but also how you can add tags or attributes or not add attributes to connections, how you can select them and process them. So connections really only exist between two objects, which makes sense, but how they're handled is a bit awkward, I would say, and not ideal. And finally, Bob and Horst were super helpful, and we had multiple engagements with them in the throughout the past year or so. But still, we didn't really get enterprise methodology consultation from Sparx, and that would be great, especially a company who sells a product called Enterprise Architect. It would be great to receive enterprise modeling methodology, not just in the detailed solution modeling, but really the enterprise level portfolio optimization, some of the things that we were talking about today in terms of governance and catalogs and all of the good stuff. So that's something on our wish list. But other than that, hopefully you found this valuable. Thank you for listening.